Alright, so let's address this problem. Taking an expressive individualistic approach to petitionary prayer, I believe, can negatively influence your sanctification. You know, the process of becoming more holy and the intimacy that grows as a believer. Now, why is this view a problem? Well, that's a good question. The reason why this is a problem, the answer to that would require me to define what expressive individualism is. Expressive individualism worships the freedom to express one's uniqueness against constraints and conventions. So, if you're applying this to a Christian, you may say, well, what constraints do Christians face? Essentially, social constraints, such as like social caste systems. Maybe economic constraints. That would be more like middle class, rich class, poor class, but not necessarily in that order. Or natural constraints like physical illnesses or diseases. These constraints and conventions usually encourage conformity, and they are viewed as threats to personal expression of individuality. If you're a Christian and you have an expressive individualistic worldview, you don't have to feel disrupted by the world recession because you are a believer and you walk by faith, not by sight. You could throw out God's promises to prosper you and da-da-da-da because you're separated. And there's nothing wrong with separating yourself as a believer or distinguishing yourself as a believer versus what the world or, the secular world may have for you. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But when you have an expressive individualistic worldview, then what happens is that you see this conformity as a threat to your own personal expression as a Christian and even your individuality. So your identity as a believer. Now that is where I really find that there is a problem, because themes that worldview are going to find as an antidote are going to be liberation and fulfillment. These are central themes of expressive individualism. Now, petitioning God for liberation and fulfillment can overlook His sovereign choice to say no. So our assumptions can mislead us. So what happens when you identify yourself and you have this, with an individualistic worldview? Then what happens is that you're looking at liberation and fulfillment in your life. It takes you away from these kinds of issues. So these constraints and these conventions. But the problem is that what happens if He says no? If God says no, what does that leave you? So expecting liberation and fulfillment can become a hinge to your faith. Now when that occurs, I think it becomes a hinge to our faith when the door closes. Where does that leave the Christian?